Racist officer tries to flex power, doesn't know the black man. He stopped overseas police corruption. He thought he pulled over just another black man. He thought this stop would end like all the others with silent submission and no consequences. What he didn't know. The man behind the wheel wasn't just a driver. He was the man who holds the fate of every crooked badge in the department. And in the next 24 hours, Officer Todd Whitman wouldn't just regret the stop. He'd face the one thing officers like him fear most, a black man with power and the proof to burn the whole system down. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Malik Carter. And this is the day racism met its reckoning. Stay with us. When a routine traffic stop turns into a career-defining moment, a police officer's worst assumptions collide with a truth he never saw coming. His target is the man who holds his future in his hands. The sun was starting its descent over the streets of Sacramento, painting the sky with streaks of gold and amber. Malik Carter was on his way home after a long day at the office. His sedan hummed softly as he adjusted the air conditioning, eager to shake off the day's stress. The radio played faintly in the background, a soothing antidote to the bustling city streets. He approached a yellow light, slowing down just as it turned red. That's when the blue and red lights erupted behind him, accompanied by the sharp blare of a police siren. Malik glanced in his rearview mirror, his brows furrowing slightly. He pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down his window as a police cruiser parked behind him. Out stepped Officer Todd Whitman, mid-30s, with a buzz cut and a badge gleaming on his chest. Whitman adjusted his belt as he swaggered toward Malik's car, exuding the confidence of someone used to being in control. "License and registration," Whitman said curtly, his voice flat but laced with a hint of authority. Malik complied without a word, reaching into his glove compartment for his registration and handing over his driver's license. His movements were deliberate and calm, but he could feel Whitman's gaze scrutinizing him as if searching for a reason to dig deeper. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Whitman asked, leaning closer to the window. "I'm not entirely sure," Malik replied evenly, his tone polite but firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Whitman said, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. Malik frowned but nodded slightly. "I see. I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand." Whitman didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing as he studied Malik more closely. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore, at least not for Whitman. His posture shifted subtly but noticeably, as if he had already decided this was more than a minor infraction. The officer glanced at the license in his hand. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. Malik hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Whitman wasn't really listening. His questions were starting to take on an edge, just enough to suggest that he wasn't concerned about a traffic violation anymore. Malik's calm demeanor seemed to work him, and he leaned in closer. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Malik replied. His tone remained steady, but the subtle shift in the air was impossible to ignore. Whitman didn't just see Malik as a driver anymore. He saw something else, something that warranted suspicion. Malik could sense the tension building, but he didn't flinch. Little did Officer Whitman know the calm exterior wasn't naivety. It was control. This was just the beginning. Whitman took a step back, folding Malik's documents with an exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. He straightened up his expression, shifting into something faintly smug, as though he'd already made up his mind about the man sitting in front of him. "Step out of the car for me," Whitman ordered. Malik's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly, but his face betrayed no reaction. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" he asked, his tone measured. Whitman's lips twitched, but he masked it quickly. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The threat hung in the air, unspoken, yet unmistakable. Malik exhaled slowly and opened the door. As he stepped out, Whitman's eyes flicked over him, sizing him up. Malik stood a little taller than the officer, his shoulders broad but his demeanor unthreatening. His tailored suit suggested professionalism. His polished shoes hinted at someone meticulous and careful, yet none of that seemed to matter. Whitman gestured toward the front of the car. "Hands where I can see them." Malik complied, his movements calm and deliberate. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Officer Whitman smirked faintly. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Malik turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Whitman. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch, and for a moment Whitman's composure faltered. He straightened up his hand, drifting toward his belt, more reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question," Malik replied. There was no defiance in his voice, just a quiet firmness that seemed to unsettle the officer. Whitman leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works. You got something to hide?" Malik let the silence stretch for a beat before answering. "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know." Whitman scoffed but didn't reply. He stepped back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic was shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. Malik wasn't reacting the way most people would. There was no fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there was control, poise, and an unsettling calm that put Whitman on edge. "You seem pretty confident," Whitman muttered almost to himself. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Malik didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." Whitman froze for half a second before turning back to face him. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come out. Malik's composure was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched, the tension between them felt electric, and Whitman was starting to realize this wasn't going to play out the way he'd expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. The real test was about to begin. Whitman tapped his fingers against the holster on his belt, his frustration barely concealed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Malik. His gaze flicked back to the sedan as though searching for a justification he hadn't yet manufactured. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Whitman said, his voice clipped. "I need to check for weapons." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" He repeated, his tone incredulous but still measured. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" Whitman's jaw tightened, and for a moment his composure cracked. "I'm not going to ask you again." Malik hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. Then, without a word, he turned and placed his palms flat against the hood of his car. Whitman approached the crunch of his boots on the asphalt, breaking the uneasy silence. The officer patted Malik down in quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little longer than necessary. It wasn't just a search. It was an attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But Malik didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't so much as shift under the invasive scrutiny. "You're clean," Whitman muttered, stepping back. The admission sounded begrudging, like he was irritated that he hadn't found anything to justify his suspicion. Malik turned to face him, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Of course I am," he said simply. "Now, officer, if you're done, I'm not done." Whitman interrupted, his voice rising slightly. The words tumbled out too quickly, betraying his need to stay in control. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do." Care to explain why? Malik folded his arms, his posture relaxed, despite the tension crackling between them. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," he said. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Whitman's eyes narrowed. "That so you a lawyer or something?" Malik smiled faintly. "Or something." The ambiguity in Malik's answer seemed to irritate Officer Whitman further. He stepped closer, invading Malik's personal space. His voice dropped to a near growl. "Listen, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Malik met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness, and so far I'm not seeing much of it here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Whitman, proud and stubborn, took the bait. Fairness. Whitman scoffed. "You think fairness is what this is about, people like you always?" He stopped himself abruptly. The words hung in the silence like smoke, even though they hadn't fully escaped. Malik's expression didn't change, but something about his posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable. He had caught exactly what Whitman had almost said. "People like me," Malik repeated. His voice was soft, but it crackled with charged meaning. Whitman bristled, stepping back slightly, realizing too late he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You know what I meant?" he muttered, though his tone lacked the bravado it carried moments ago. "I think I do," Malik replied quietly. But his calmness wasn't passive anymore. It was razor-sharp, cutting through the layers of pretense like a scalpel. "And I think we both know this interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago." Whitman opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted, and the officer felt it deep in his gut. He was on unfamiliar ground, and it showed. Malik's voice sliced through the thick tension. "Officer Whitman, I think it's time you know who I am." Whitman raised an eyebrow, irritation flaring again. "I don't care who you are." But the faint crack in his tone told a different story. Malik reached into his inner pocket, slow, deliberate. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly, his eyes never leaving Whitman's. "No sudden moves, no games, just facts." He pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and held it out. "Malik Carter," he said. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Whitman froze. His eyes darted from the badge back to Malik's face, then to the badge again. He was searching for some sign that this was a bluff, a joke anything but real. But there was no humor in Malik's face, only quiet authority. "Internal Affairs," Whitman echoed. His voice cracked slightly. "Yes," Malik replied, finishing the sentence for him. "The division that investigates officer misconduct, profiling, excessive force. The division that decides whether someone like you deserves to wear that badge." Whitman took a step back. His hand dropped from his belt. The weight of his authority, once so secure, now seemed to press on him like a vice. Malik stepped forward, closing the distance Whitman had instinctively created. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been?" Officer Whitman, Malik asked, voice calm but piercing. Whitman didn't answer. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd walked into a courtroom with no defense. "It's not the profiling," Malik continued, though that's bad enough. "It's not the baseless escalation either. It's the fact that you've done all of this every step without even stopping to ask who I was. Because you assumed. You assumed I didn't know my rights. You assumed I didn't belong. Because I didn't fit your picture of what respect looks like." Whitman opened his mouth again. Nothing came. "And that's not just a problem for me," Malik added. "That's a problem for every single person you pull over." The officer's shoulders sagged slightly. His face had gone pale. Malik stepped back, finally giving Whitman a breath of space. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, still firm, but not cruel. "You're going to return my documents, and you're going to think very, very carefully about your next words. Because after today, you won't just be explaining this to me, you'll be explaining it to the department, to oversight, and possibly to the public." Whitman hesitated, torn between pride and the avalanche of consequences now bearing down on him. Malik's voice dropped to a low, cutting tone. "You're going to hear from me again, officer. Not as the man you stopped on the side of the road, but as the man who decides whether you keep your badge." There it was, the final blow. And it didn't come with yelling. It came with clarity. Whitman's hand trembled slightly as he retrieved Malik's license and registration. He handed them over without a word. Malik took them, tucked them into his wallet, and walked slowly back to the driver's seat. He paused with one hand on the door, turned his head one last time. "Remember this, Officer Whitman," he said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." Then he got in, started the car, and drove away. Whitman remained on the sidewalk alone in the fading light, the man who had just learned the most expensive lesson of his career. The drive home was quiet. Too quiet. Malik Carter sat behind the wheel, hands, steady eyes sharp, but his mind was a storm. The encounter with Officer Whitman wasn't unique, and that was exactly why it haunted him. Because for every Whitman, there were 10 more. Because this wasn't just one officer having a bad day. This was a blueprint, and Malik was done tolerating it. He pulled into the driveway of his modest home in East Sacramento, the sun just dipping behind the rooftops. As he stepped inside, the silence of the house greeted him like a familiar friend. He removed his coat, loosened his tie, but he didn't rest. Not yet. Instead, he walked into his study, a room lined with case files, legal journals, and a single framed photo of his graduating class from Quantico. He sat down at his desk, turned on his lamp, and opened his laptop. The screen flickered to life, illuminating a folder he hadn't touched in months. Internal flagged officer cases unresolved. With a deep breath, Malik opened a new document. He titled it, Field Encounter Officer Todd Whitman, Profiled Traffic Stop, Use of Pretext. He began typing, every word deliberate, every sentence a thread in a noose that would hang more than just one man's badge if pulled tightly enough. Then with a click, he opened a second tab, an encrypted message portal used only by senior investigators. He drafted a note. To Chief Raymond Holt, Immediate Departmental Concern. Officer Conduct Chief. I need 15 minutes of your time tonight. I was stopped and profiled this evening by Officer Todd Whitman during a routine traffic stop. What began as a stop for a non-existent traffic violation quickly escalated into a baseless search and verbal intimidation. I believe the conduct I experienced reflects a systemic issue that extends beyond one man. This cannot be ignored. Malik Carter, Head of Internal Affairs. He hit send. Malik leaned back for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street was still, but he knew what was coming. What must come. This wouldn't be buried like the others. Not this time. 37 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A call from Chief Holt. Malik answered. Raymond. The voice on the other end was steady but laced with concern. Tell me everything. Malik did. From the moment the lights flashed behind him to the moment he showed his badge and the exact words that Officer Whitman had nearly said aloud. Chief Holt didn't interrupt once. When Malik finished, there was a long silence. Then Holt spoke. Jesus. Yeah, Malik said. And if he says it to me, imagine what he says to the kids without a badge. Another pause. You're right. We need to move. Not just on him, Malik replied. We need to widen the lens. I've been compiling records off the books, complaints, quiet settlements, patrol behavior trends. Whitman is part of a pattern, not a fluke. I trust you, Holt said. Whatever you need, resources, time, press clearance, you'll have it. I'm not just doing this for me, Malik said. I'm doing it for every person who didn't get a chance to walk away. Chief Holt's voice hardened. Then let's burn it down and rebuild something better. As the call ended, Malik returned to his desk. He opened a fresh case file, labeled it Operation Reset. Tonight wasn't just about documentation, it was the beginning of reckoning. The next morning, the Sacramento Internal Affairs conference room wasn't just full, it was electric. Senior investigators, legal analysts, and oversight auditors lined both sides of the long oval table. Some clutched notepads. Others stared silently at the projected dossier now glowing on the screen. At the head sat Malik Carter, no longer the calm man at a traffic stop, but a force. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Officer Todd Whitman is the match," he said. But the fire was already there. He clicked to the next slide. Data, charts, complaint patterns. District heat maps showing where unfiled civilian reports had quietly disappeared over the past 18 months. "I'm not here for symbolic discipline," Malik continued. "I'm here to end the pattern." Agent Rosa Franklin, seated at his left, leaned forward. "You think Whitman's part of a network, I think he's part of a culture," Malik replied. "One that's tolerated unchecked, stops racial profiling, unnecessary escalations, all dressed up as protocol." He tapped a button. A photo of Officer Whitman's past disciplinary log appeared. 12 flagged stops, 5 written warnings, 2 civilian mediation sessions. No formal action. Rosa exhaled through her nose. "And he's still on the street." "Not for long," Malik said. Another agent, Darren Cho, raised a hand. "What are you proposing?" Malik didn't hesitate. "Effective immediately, we open Operation Reset. We're pulling body cam footage, GPS records, internal communications, and cross-referencing them with anonymized civilian complaints from the past 2 years. Any officer with a pattern like Whitman's, they go under the microscope." Rosa asked, "What about cooperation from Patrol Command?" "I've already spoken to Chief Holt," Malik answered. "He's with us. Full access. No red tape." There was a pause. Then Darren muttered, "We're going to make a lot of enemies." Malik looked around the room, his voice a low, unwavering flame. "Good. That means we're aiming in the right direction." He stood, walked to the window overlooking downtown Sacramento, and added without turning, "I don't care if it's 1 officer or 50. This department will learn that you don't get to humiliate people and walk away clean, not anymore. Because if they're not protecting the badge, they're staining it." Rosa nodded solemnly. "Then let's clean it." The room moved into action. Laptops opened, coffee stirred, screens glowed with personnel files, complaint logs, time-stamped videos. And at the center of it all, Malik Carter, once profiled on a quiet street, now leading the fight to tear down the silence brick by brick. Because this wasn't just a reaction, it was a reckoning. 3 days later, the sun blazed over Sacramento City Hall. Reporters jostled for position behind caution tape. Cameras were trained on a podium bearing the seal of the Internal Affairs Division. The buzz in the air wasn't just from the media, it was from tension, anticipation, and something else: change. The crowd wasn't just press, it was people, community leaders, activists, college students, off-duty officers, even families of those once stopped and never heard from again. Then the double doors opened. Malik Carter stepped out flanked by Chief Raymond Holt and Rosa Franklin. The murmurs turned to silence. He took his place behind the microphone, eyes steely, voice calm and purpose razor-sharp. "Good afternoon." No one moved. "My name is Malik Carter. I'm the head of Internal Affairs for the Sacramento Division. I stand here today not just as a representative of law enforcement, but as a black man who was profiled by a fellow officer less than a week ago." A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. I was stopped for no reason, interrogated, searched, demeaned, and it only ended when I showed a badge. He looked out at the sea of faces. But what if I didn't have one? The question landed like a thunderclap. What happened to me is not unique, and that's exactly why it's unacceptable. So today we are launching a formal investigation, not into just one officer, but into an entire system of unchecked power, racial bias, and failure to hold our own accountable. The crowd leaned in. We're calling it Operation Reset. Every patrol division, every complaint, every pattern from traffic stops to internal cover-ups will be reviewed. And if we find abuse, it will not be buried. It will be brought into the light. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. But Malik raised a hand. "This is not about destroying good officers. This is about protecting the badge from those who tarnish it. Because trust is not built through PR campaigns. It's built through truth." He paused, looked at the cameras dead on. "And to those watching this, who've been silent, supervisors, Commanders, anyone who let this culture fester, consider this your wake-up call. If you stood by and did nothing, you're part of the story now. Chief Holt stepped forward, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. We support this fully, and if you stand for the people, you'll stand with us. A beat. Then someone in the crowd began to clap, then another, then the whole plaza. Not polite applause, but thunder echoing off the marble steps of the institution itself. Malik stepped back, not smiling, not triumphant, just ready, because this wasn't the climax. It was the first day of war against silence. Later that night, long after the cameras were packed away and the plaza had emptied, Malik Carter sat alone in his office. He stared at the city skyline outside his window, Sacramento glowing like it always had. But something felt different now. Not the buildings, not the traffic, the air. It carried truth. He pulled out a folder from his drawer. Inside it wasn't just reports, it was letters, emails, calls. Dozens of people had already come forward after the press conference. Some were officers, others were civilians. All of them had one thing in common. They had stories no one had ever believed. Until now. Malik ran his hand over the edges of the folder and whispered, "Not anymore." Across the city, a young man walked home from his shift, his heart lighter than usual. A woman who once filed a complaint that went unanswered reopened the email. A rookie cop sat at his desk and rewrote his personal code of conduct. The ripple had begun, because of one moment, one man, one refusal to stay silent. And here's the truth we need to remember: power isn't in the badge. It's in how you choose to wear it. Respect isn't owed by fear, it's earned through decency. And justice isn't a title, it's a practice. One that begins the moment we stop protecting comfort and start protecting people. This isn't just Malik Carter's story. This is all of ours. Because the next time someone abuses authority, the next time someone says you don't belong here, someone like Malik will be there not just to respond, but to lead.